Rear Admiral Marcus Thompson's story begins in a small, sleepy coastal town where life moved at a slower pace. The ocean breeze carried stories of sailors and fishermen who had spent their lives battling the waves. For young Marcus, the sea wasn't just a backdrop, it was a calling. From an early age, he felt drawn to its vastness, its mystery, and the promise of adventure it held. But more than anything, Marcus dreamed of serving his country, a dream that would shape his entire life. Growing up in a modest household, Marcus learned the value of hard work from his parents. His father worked long hours as a dockhand, while his mother took care of the family and sewed clothes for extra income. They didn't have much, but they taught Marcus the importance of integrity, perseverance, and treating others with respect. These lessons stuck with him throughout his life, guiding him even during the toughest times. As a child, Marcus loved listening to tales of bravery and heroism. He admired soldiers, sailors, and explorers who dared to face challenges head-on. One day, while flipping through an old magazine at the local library, he stumbled upon a picture of a naval officer standing proudly on the deck of a ship. Something about the uniform, the crisp lines, the metals gleaming under the sun, captured his imagination. That moment planted a seed in his mind. One day, he too would wear that uniform and serve his nation. But Marcus knew achieving such a goal wouldn't be easy. In his community, opportunities were scarce, especially for someone like him. Being African American meant facing obstacles others didn't have to think about. There were whispers of doubt everywhere, teachers who underestimated him, classmates who mocked his ambitions, and people who believed he'd never amount up to much. Yet Marcus refused to let negativity define him. Instead, he used it as fuel to push harder. School became his battleground. While other kids played outside after class, Marcus buried himself in books, studying everything he could get his hands on: math, science, history. He excelled in all subjects, earning top marks year after year. His teachers began to notice his determination, and some even encouraged him to apply for scholarships. With their support, Marcus secured a spot at a prestigious military academy, marking the first step toward his dream. Life at the academy was challenging, both physically and mentally. The rigorous training tested Marcus's limits every single day. Early morning runs left him exhausted, classroom lectures stretched his focus, and drills pushed his body to its breaking point. On top of that, he faced prejudice from some of his peers. A few cadets made snide remarks or excluded him from group activities, trying to make him feel out of place. But Marcus didn't let them win. He poured his energy into proving himself, not just to them, but to himself. One particular incident stood out during his time at the academy. During a leadership exercise, Marcus was tasked with leading a team through a simulated rescue mission. At first, his teammates doubted his abilities, questioning whether he could handle the responsibility. But Marcus stayed calm under pressure, delegating tasks efficiently and keeping morale high. When the exercise ended successfully, even his harshest critics had to admit he'd done an excellent job. That moment boosted his confidence and showed him the power of resilience. After graduating at the top of his class, Marcus joined the Navy, eager to put his skills to use. Over the years, he climbed the ranks steadily, earning promotions through sheer dedication and excellence. Each new role brought fresh challenges, but Marcus tackled them with the same unwavering spirit he'd shown since childhood. Whether navigating treacherous waters or commanding troops in high-stakes operations, he proved time and again that he was a natural leader. His defining moment came during a humanitarian mission in a war-torn region. Thousands of civilians were trapped without food or medical supplies, and Marcus was part of the team sent to deliver aid. The operation was fraught with danger, but Marcus remained fearless, coordinating efforts between ground forces and air support to ensure everyone received help. Thanks to his quick thinking and strategic planning, countless lives were saved. For his bravery and leadership, he received numerous commendations, including a medal for exceptional service. By the time Marcus reached the rank of Rear Admiral, he had become a legend within the Navy. Colleagues respected him not only for his accomplishments but also for his humility and kindness. Despite holding such a prestigious position, he never forgot where he came from. Whenever he returned home, He visited local schools to talk to students about chasing their dreams, no matter how impossible they seemed. Hard work and belief in yourself can take you farther than you ever imagined, he often said, inspiring countless young minds to aim high. Yet despite his achievements, Marcus couldn't escape the reality of racism. Throughout his career, he encountered individuals who judged him based on the color of his skin rather than his capabilities. Some questioned his qualifications, while others dismissed his contributions outright. But Marcus refused to let bitterness consume him. Instead, he channeled his experiences into advocacy, speaking out against discrimination whenever he had the chance. He believed change started with conversation and education, and he dedicated himself to fostering understanding wherever he went. Little did Marcus know, however, that his greatest test was yet to come. After decades of service, he thought he had seen it all. But fate had something else in store, a moment that would shake him to his core and force him to confront injustice once again. It was a quiet evening, one that seemed ordinary at first glance. Little did anyone know, this night would alter the course of Marcus's life forever and spark a movement that resonated far beyond his small coastal hometown. The sun had dipped below the horizon, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple as Rear Admiral Marcus Thompson drove along a quiet suburban road. The evening air was cool, carrying with it the faint scent of blooming flowers. It had been a long day, but Marcus felt content. Earlier that afternoon, he had attended a community event where he'd spoken passionately about the importance of diversity and inclusion in the military. His words had resonated with the audience, sparking conversations that lingered even after the event ended. Now, as he cruised toward home, he allowed himself a rare moment of calm. Marcus wasn't one to seek the spotlight, but tonight, he couldn't help but feel proud of what he'd accomplished. He had spent decades working tirelessly to break barriers and pave the way for others who might follow in his footsteps. Tonight's speech was just another small step in that journey. As he glanced out the window at the peaceful neighborhoods lining the road, he thought about how far he'd come, not just professionally but personally. Life hadn't always been easy, but every challenge had made him stronger. He turned on the radio, letting soft jazz fill the car. The music soothed him, blending perfectly with the gentle hum of the engine. For once, there were no pressing matters weighing on his mind. No urgent reports to review, no meetings to prepare for. Just the open road ahead and the promise of a relaxing evening. He rolled down the window slightly, letting the breeze brush against his face. Everything seemed perfect, but perfection is often fleeting. As Marcus approached an intersection, he noticed flashing red and blue lights in his rearview mirror. At first, he assumed the police car was simply passing by or heading somewhere else. But then it slowed down and pulled up behind him, its siren wailing briefly before falling silent. Confused, Marcus glanced at the speedometer. He was well within the limit, and he hadn't run any stop signs or broken any traffic rules. Still, he signaled and pulled over to the side of the road, following protocol. The tires crunched softly against the gravel as he brought the car to a halt. Marcus took a deep breath, reminding himself to stay calm. Pulling over for no apparent reason wasn't entirely new to him. It had happened before, though not recently. Each time it left a bitter taste in his mouth, a reminder of the biases he thought he'd risen above. But tonight he told himself things would be different. He was a decorated naval officer, someone who had dedicated his life to serving his country. Surely whoever was behind him would realize there had been a mistake. Moments later, the door of the police car opened, and Officer Daniel Grayson stepped out. Even from a distance, Marcus could sense something off about the man's demeanor. Grayson moved with deliberate slowness, his hand resting conspicuously on the holster of his gun. His flashlight cut through the darkness like a blade, shining directly into Marcus's eyes as he approached the driver's side window. "License and registration," Grayson barked, his tone sharp and accusatory. There was no politeness, no attempt at courtesy, just an order delivered with unmistakable hostility. Marcus blinked against the bright light, squinting as he reached for his wallet. "Good evening, officer," he said calmly, doing his best to diffuse the tension. "Is there a problem?" "Believe I was driving safely." Grayson ignored the question, leaning closer to the window. "Keep your hands where I can see them," he snapped, his voice rising. The flashlight trembled slightly in his grip, casting jagged shadows across the interior of the car. Marcus froze, his fingers hovering near his wallet. He hadn't expected this level of aggression. "I'm reaching for my ID," he explained, slowly enunciating each word carefully. "I'm Rear Admiral Marcus Thompson, United States Navy." For a brief second, silence hung heavy in the air. Then Grayson scoffed, the sound dripping with disdain. "Yeah, right," he muttered clearly, unconvinced. "Sure you are. Everyone knows admirals don't drive around and beat up old cars like this." Marcus bit back a sigh. His vehicle wasn't luxurious, true, but it was reliable, and beside the point. What mattered was that he was being singled out unfairly, judged not by his actions but by appearances. He tried again, keeping his tone measured. "Officer, if you'd like, I can provide my military ID. You're welcome to verify my identity through dispatch." Grayson didn't respond immediately. Instead, he straightened up, his posture rigid. His eyes narrowed as he studied Marcus. His expression, unreadable yet undeniably hostile. Finally, he spoke, his words laced with venom. "You think you're special, huh? Flashing your fancy title around? Well, let me tell you something. I don't care who you say you are. Around here, we play by our rules." Marcus felt a chill run down his spine. This wasn't just a routine traffic stop. It was something far more sinister. Grayson's behavior screamed prejudice, a toxic mix of arrogance and bias that Marcus had hoped to leave behind in his younger years. Yet here it was, rearing its ugly head once again. Despite the growing unease in his chest, Marcus refused to let fear take hold. He had faced adversity countless times before, and he knew how to handle it. Slowly, deliberately, he placed both hands on the steering wheel, ensuring they were visible. "Officer," he began, his voice steady despite the storm brewing inside him. "I understand you're doing your job, but I assure you I've done nothing wrong. Let's resolve this peacefully." Grayson's response was immediate and alarming. Without warning, he drew his weapon, pointing it squarely at Marcus's chest. The metallic click of the safety being released echoed in the stillness of the night. "Don't move!" Grayson shouted, his voice trembling with anger. "Keep your hands where I can see them, or I swear I'll shoot." Time seemed to slow as Marcus processed what was happening. A gun pointed at him. For no reason other than the color of his skin. The absurdity of the situation hit him like a punch to the gut. Here he was, a man who had risked his life countless times for his country, who had earned medals for bravery and leadership, and now he was being treated like a criminal. Neighbors began to emerge from their homes, drawn by the commotion. Some stood silently, watching with wide eyes, while others whispered among themselves. A few pulled out their phones, capturing the surreal scene unfolding before them. Marcus caught glimpses of their faces in the glow of streetlights, searching for signs of support, or at least understanding. But most looked away, unwilling to intervene. Grayson, meanwhile, remained unrelenting. "Get out of the car," he demanded, motioning with the gun. "Now!" Marcus hesitated, his mind racing. Every instinct told him to comply, to avoid escalating the situation further. But a part of him rebelled against the injustice of it all. How could this be happening? In broad daylight, or rather, under the cover of night, he was being targeted, for something beyond his control. Still, he knew better than to argue. With deliberate movements, he unbuckled his seatbelt and stepped out of the car, raising his hands high above his head. "I'm unarmed," he said firmly, meeting Grayson's gaze. "There's no need for violence here." But Grayson wasn't listening. His focus was singular, his actions fueled by prejudice and fear. Within moments, he had forced Marcus to his knees, yanking his arms behind his back and snapping handcuffs into place. The metal dug painfully into Marcus's wrists, but he didn't cry out. Instead, he closed his eyes, drawing strength from memories of all he'd overcome. This wasn't the end of his story. It couldn't be. As Grayson shoved him roughly toward the patrol car, Marcus locked eyes with one of the bystanders, a young boy clutching his mother's hand. The child's expression was a mixture of confusion and fear, mirroring the emotions swirling inside Marcus himself. In that instant, Marcus realized this ordeal wasn't just about him. It was about sending a message that no matter how high you climbed, no matter how much you achieved, certain people would always try to bring you down. And Marcus vowed, silently but resolutely, that he wouldn't let them win. The handcuffs bit into Marcus's wrists as he sat in the back seat of the patrol car, his mind racing with a whirlwind of emotions. The interior of the vehicle smelled faintly of leather and disinfectant, an oddly mundane scent that clashed with the surreal nature of the situation. Outside, the crowd of onlookers had grown larger, their murmurs blending into a low hum that seeped through the closed windows. Some held their phones aloft, recording every detail, while others simply stared, in disbelief. The flashing red and blue lights reflected off nearby houses, casting eerie shadows that danced across lawns and driveways. Officer Daniel Grayson stood beside the open driver's door, speaking into his radio in clipped tones. His words were muffled, but Marcus could hear enough to understand that he was calling for backup. "Suspicious individual," Grayson said, his voice dripping with disdain. "Claims to be some big-shot Navy officer, but I'm not buying it. Could be impersonating a federal official, maybe even carrying forged documents." Marcus clenched his jaw, forcing himself to stay calm despite the rising tide of frustration boiling inside him. He knew better than to argue or protest. Doing so would only escalate things further. Instead, he focused on breathing deeply, reminding himself that this wasn't just about him, it was bigger than him. This moment was yet another example of systemic prejudice, one that countless people faced daily. And though it stung deeply, Marcus also recognized an opportunity. If handled correctly, this incident could shine a light on the injustices that still plagued society. As he sat there, immobilized and humiliated, memories began flooding back. Memories of similar moments from his past when he'd been judged not by his actions but by the color of his skin. There was the time in high school when a teacher suggested he stick to vocational classes instead of advanced placement courses because those subjects might be too challenging. Or the recruitment officer who once told him, albeit subtly, that leadership roles in the military weren't meant for someone like him. Each memory carried its own sting, but they also reminded Marcus of how far he'd come, and how much he refused to let setbacks define him. Grayson slammed the car door shut and slid into the driver's seat, breaking Marcus out of his thoughts. The officer glanced at him in the rearview mirror, his expression cold and unyielding. "You're in serious trouble," he muttered, almost casually, as if arresting innocent people was part of his daily routine. "Impersonating an officer is a felony, you know, and resisting arrest? That'll get you locked up real quick." "I haven't resisted anything," Marcus replied evenly, meeting Grayson's gaze in the mirror. His voice was calm, measured, a stark contrast to the venomous tone Grayson had used since pulling him over. "I've cooperated fully. You know that," Grayson snorted, clearly unconvinced. "We'll see what the evidence says," he shot back, starting the engine. The car lurched forward, tires crunching against gravel as they pulled away from the scene. Marcus watched the growing crowd recede in the distance, their faces blurring together until they became indistinguishable shapes. He wondered how many of them truly understood what had just happened, or cared enough to do something about it. The ride to the police station felt endless, each mile stretching longer than the last. Grayson drove in silence, occasionally glancing at Marcus in the rearview mirror. The hostility radiating from him was palpable, filling the cramped space with an oppressive energy. Marcus tried to ignore it, focusing instead on formulating a plan. He knew he couldn't rely solely on his rank or reputation to resolve this mess. He needed concrete proof of who he was and what he represented. Fortunately, he always carried his military ID card, a small rectangle of laminated plastic that symbolized decades of service and sacrifice. It was currently tucked safely inside his wallet, which Grayson had confiscated during the arrest. When they finally arrived at the station, Grayson parked the car and stepped out without a word. Moments later, he opened the back door and yanked Marcus out roughly, gripping his arm with unnecessary force. "Let's go," he barked, steering him toward the entrance. Inside, the fluorescent lights buzzed overhead, illuminating a sterile room filled with desks, chairs, and uniformed officers going about their business. A few glanced up curiously as Marcus was led past, but most quickly returned to their work, seemingly indifferent to the drama unfolding before them. They stopped at a counter where a desk sergeant sat typing on a computer. Grayson leaned in, lowering his voice as he spoke. "Got a suspect here," he said, nodding toward Marcus. "Claims to be a Navy officer, but I think it's bogus. Need to process him." The sergeant looked up, his expression neutral. "Name?" he asked, directing the question at Marcus. "Rear Admiral Marcus Thompson," Marcus replied, enunciating each syllable clearly. "United States Navy. My credentials can verify that." The sergeant raised an eyebrow, clearly skeptical. "All right, we'll check it out," he said, turning back to his computer. Meanwhile, Grayson guided Marcus to a holding area, pushing him down onto a hard plastic chair. The handcuffs remained firmly in place, digging deeper into his skin with every movement. Minutes ticked by agonizingly slowly. Marcus shifted uncomfortably, trying to ease the pressure on his wrists. Around him, other detainees muttered amongst themselves, some shooting curious glances his way. One man, a scruffy-looking guy with unkempt hair, leaned over and whispered, "What did you do?" "Nothing," Marcus replied softly, shaking his head. "Just being black, apparently." The man chuckled bitterly. "Join the club," he said, leaning back against the wall. Despite the grim humor of the exchange, Marcus couldn't help but feel a pang of sadness. How many others had been treated this way? How many lives had been disrupted or ruined by baseless accusations and unchecked bias? He thought about the young boy he'd seen earlier, wide-eyed and frightened, and wondered what kind of message this ordeal sent to the next generation. Would they grow up believing justice was blind, or would they learn early on that fairness was often dictated by privilege? Finally, after what felt like hours, the desk sergeant reappeared, holding Marcus's wallet in one hand and a phone in the other. "Admiral Thompson?" he asked hesitantly, his tone noticeably softer now. "Dispatch confirmed your identity. Apologies for the mix-up." Marcus nodded, relief washing over him, but only slightly. This confirmation should have ended the nightmare right then and there. Yet Grayson, standing nearby, didn't look remotely apologetic. If anything, his scowl deepened, his jaw tightening as he processed the information. "Doesn't change the fact that he resisted arrest," Grayson snapped, glaring at Marcus. "He's still under my custody." The sergeant frowned, clearly uncomfortable with the situation. "Sir, maybe we should—" "No," Grayson interrupted sharply. "This isn't over yet." And with that, Marcus realized this confrontation wasn't just about mistaken identity. It was personal. Whatever animosity Grayson harbored ran deeper than any badge or uniform. It was rooted in prejudice, fear, and hatred, the same forces that had plagued society for generations. And tonight, Marcus had become their unwilling target. But as he sat there, surrounded by uncertainty and injustice, Marcus resolved to fight back, not with anger or retaliation, but with truth and dignity. Because this wasn't just his battle anymore. It belonged to everyone who deserved to live free from fear and discrimination. The air in the police station was thick with tension, a palpable heaviness that seemed to press down on everyone present. Rear Admiral Marcus Thompson sat silently, his posture upright despite the discomfort of the hard plastic chair and the lingering ache in his wrists from the handcuffs. His mind worked methodically, piecing together the events of the night while preparing for what lay ahead. He knew this moment wasn't just about him. It had become something far greater. It was a test of integrity, resilience, and justice. "Officer." Daniel Grayson paced nearby, his face flushed with frustration and embarrassment. The confirmation of Marcus's identity should have been enough to end the ordeal, but instead, it only seemed to fuel Grayson's hostility. "This doesn't change anything," he muttered under his breath, loud enough for Marcus to hear. "You still disrespected my authority, Marcus exhaled slowly, keeping his composure intact. He turned his head slightly, meeting Grayson's fiery gaze with calm, unwavering eyes. "Officer," he said evenly, "I've done nothing to disrespect you or anyone else. I followed your instructions, cooperated fully, and identified myself without hesitation. If there's been any misunderstanding, it's not on my part." Grayson bristled at the response, clearly unaccustomed to being challenged, especially by someone he viewed as subordinate. "Don't try to lecture me," he snapped, stepping closer. "You think your fancy title gives you special treatment? Newsflash, it doesn't work like that here." Marcus didn't flinch. Instead, he leaned forward slightly, his voice steady and deliberate. "My title isn't about privilege, it's about responsibility. I earned it through years of service, sacrifice, and dedication to protecting this country, including people like you. But tonight, I'm not standing here as a rear admiral. I'm standing here as a citizen who deserves the same rights and respect as anyone else." The words hung in the air, sharp and undeniable. For a brief moment, Grayson faltered, his confidence wavering. But then he straightened up, masking his unease with renewed aggression. "Enough talk," he growled, grabbing Marcus by the arm. "You're coming with me." As Grayson led Marcus back toward the processing desk, the other officers in the room exchanged uneasy glances. Some shifted uncomfortably in their seats, avoiding eye contact, while others whispered among themselves. One young officer, barely out of training by the looks of him, hesitated before approaching the desk sergeant. "Sir," he murmured quietly, "is this really necessary? We've already confirmed who he is." "Stay out of it," Grayson barked over his shoulder, cutting the younger man off mid-sentence. The rookie recoiled, retreating hastily to his corner. The sergeant, meanwhile, looked increasingly conflicted. He glanced at Marcus, then at Grayson, clearly torn between following protocol and appeasing his colleague. After a long pause, he cleared his throat nervously. "Look, Officer Grayson," he began cautiously, "maybe we can resolve this peacefully. There's no need to escalate things further." "You don't tell me how to handle my arrests," Grayson shot back, his tone icy. "If you've got a problem, take it up with the chief." With that, he shoved Marcus into an interrogation room, slamming the door shut behind them. The sound echoed ominously, reverberating off the bare walls. Inside, the space was small and sterile, lit by a single overhead bulb that flickered intermittently. A metal table stood in the center, flanked by two chairs, one occupied by Grayson, the other left conspicuously empty for Marcus. Grayson gestured sharply for Marcus to sit, which he did without protest. Despite the intimidation tactics, Marcus remained composed, his expression calm and resolute. He understood the psychological game Grayson was playing, creating an environment designed to make him feel powerless and afraid. But Marcus refused to let fear dictate his actions. He'd faced far worse situations during his military career, life and death scenarios where staying level-headed meant the difference between success and failure. This was no different. Grayson leaned forward, resting his elbows on the table. His voice dropped to a menacing whisper. "Let's get one thing straight," he said, jabbing a finger toward Marcus. "You might have some fancy medals and titles, but in here, you're nobody. You understand me?" Marcus met his gaze directly, unflinching. "I understand perfectly," he replied, his tone measured but firm. "But let's also be clear about something else. I know my rights, and I know that what you're doing right now is wrong, not just morally but legally." For a split second, Grayson's mask slipped, revealing a flicker of uncertainty, but he quickly recovered, forcing a smirk onto his face. "Rights?" he sneered. "You haven't seen your lawyer yet, have you? Until then, you're at my mercy." Marcus shook his head slightly, almost imperceptibly. "No," he corrected softly. "I'm at the mercy of justice, and justice always prevails." The statement struck a nerve, causing Grayson to slam his fist against the table. The sudden noise made Marcus flinch ever so slightly, but otherwise he remained unfazed. Grayson's anger was predictable, a knee-jerk reaction to losing control of the situation. Deep down, Marcus knew that Grayson's bravado masked insecurity, a desperate attempt to assert dominance over someone he perceived as a threat. After several tense minutes of silence, Grayson finally spoke again, though his voice lacked its earlier venom. "Fine," he muttered, leaning back in his chair. "We'll see how tough you are when the charges come in." "Charges?" Marcus raised an eyebrow, genuinely curious. "What exactly am I being charged with?" Grayson hesitated, caught off guard by the question. Clearly, he hadn't thought that far ahead. "Resisting arrest," he blurted after a beat, "and obstructing justice." Marcus nodded slowly, as if considering the claim. "Interesting," he said, tilting his head slightly, "because I recall complying with every instruction you gave me. Unless raising my hands and identifying myself counts as resistance these days." Grayson's jaw tightened, his frustration mounting. "Stop twisting my words," he snapped. "You know what I mean?" "No," Marcus countered, his voice gaining strength. "Actually, I don't. Because resisting arrest requires intent, and I had none. Obstructing justice implies interference, and I provided all the information you requested. So tell me, Officer Grayson, what crime have I committed aside from existing in a world where men like you refuse to see past their own biases?" The room fell silent, the weight of Marcus's words settling heavily between them. Grayson opened his mouth to respond but found himself at a loss. For the first time since the encounter began, doubt crept into his expression, clouding the arrogance that had defined him thus far. Outside the interrogation room, the atmosphere was equally charged. Several officers milled about, exchanging hushed conversations. One of them, a seasoned detective named Harris, approached the desk sergeant, his brow furrowed with concern. "What's going on with Grayson and the Admiral?" he asked, nodding toward the closed door. "This whole thing feels off." The sergeant sighed, rubbing his temples wearily. "It does," he admitted. "But Grayson won't listen to reason. He's convinced the guy's guilty of something, even though we both know he's not." Harris frowned, clearly troubled. "We can't let this slide," he said firmly. "If word gets out that we sat idly by while one of our own abused his power, it'll destroy the department's reputation, not to mention the legal ramifications." Before the sergeant could respond, the front doors of the station burst open, ushering in a wave of reporters and activists. Word of the incident had spread rapidly thanks to social media posts from eyewitnesses and neighbors who had filmed parts of the arrest. Cameras flashed, microphones were thrust forward, and voices clamored for answers. The sudden influx of attention sent ripples of panic through the station, forcing officers to scramble into damage control mode. Back in the interrogation room, Grayson noticed the commotion through the window blinds. His face paled visibly as realization dawned. This wasn't just a local issue anymore, it was national news, and he was at the center of it. Marcus observed the shift in Grayson's demeanor, noting the cracks beginning to form in his facade. "Looks like the world's watching now," he remarked calmly, folding his hands on the table. "Maybe it's time to do the right thing for everyone's sake." Grayson stared at him, his chest rising and falling with labored breaths. For the first time, he seemed unsure of himself, uncertain of how to proceed. The bravado that had fueled his actions all evening had evaporated, leaving behind only fear and regret. And in that moment, Marcus realized something important. This wasn't just about holding Grayson accountable. It was about showing him and everyone else that change was possible. Even in the darkest moments, there was always a chance to turn things around. All it took was courage, honesty, and a willingness to confront the truth. As the chaos outside continued to build, Marcus sat quietly, his resolve stronger than ever. Whatever happened next, he knew he wouldn't back down. Because this fight wasn't just his. It belonged to everyone who believed in fairness, equality, and justice. The crowd outside the police station grew larger by the minute, a sea of faces illuminated by camera flashes and smartphone screens. Reporters shouted questions at anyone who dared step near the entrance, while activists held up signs that read, "Justice for Marcus and end police brutality." The energy was electric, a mix of anger, frustration, and determination rippling through the masses. It was clear this incident had struck a nerve, not just locally, but across the nation. Inside, the interrogation room, the tension was equally palpable. Officer Daniel Grayson sat stiffly in his chair, his hands gripping the edge of the table so tightly his knuckles turned white. His earlier bravado had crumbled under the weight of public scrutiny, leaving him visibly shaken. He glanced repeatedly at the window blinds as if expecting the reporters to burst in at any moment. For the first time, he seemed acutely aware of the consequences of his actions and the spotlight they had brought upon him. Rear Admiral Marcus Thompson watched Grayson carefully, his expression calm but resolute. Though he could feel the adrenaline coursing through his veins, he maintained an outward appearance of composure. This wasn't just about revenge or vindication. It was about accountability and change. Every word spoken, every decision made tonight would ripple outward, shaping how society viewed issues of racial bias and law enforcement misconduct. Finally, after what felt like an eternity of silence, Grayson spoke, his voice quieter than before. "You think you're some kind of hero?" he muttered bitterly, avoiding eye contact. "That you can waltz in here and make me look bad?" Marcus tilted his head slightly, studying the man across from him. There was no triumph in his gaze, only empathy tinged with resolve. "I'm not trying to make you look bad," he replied, evenly. "But I won't stay silent either. What happened tonight wasn't right, and pretending otherwise won't fix anything." Grayson clenched his jaw, clearly struggling to process the situation. Part of him wanted to lash out, to double down on his earlier aggression. But another part, the part that recognized the gravity of the moment, knew he couldn't keep digging himself deeper into a hole. Still, pride kept him from admitting fault outright. Instead, he leaned back in his chair, crossing his arms defensively. "Fine," he said gruffly. "Say whatever you want. Doesn't change the fact that people are going to believe what they want to believe." Marcus nodded slowly, acknowledging the truth in those words. Perception mattered, especially in cases like this. But perception alone wasn't enough to drive meaningful change. Action was required. "Beliefs don't exist in a vacuum," Marcus said thoughtfully. "They're shaped by evidence, experiences, and leadership. Tonight we have an opportunity to show the world that justice isn't blind when it needs to be open-eyed. If we handle this the right way, maybe something good can come out of it." Grayson scoffed, though there was less venom in his tone now. "Good luck with that," he muttered, shaking his head. "People already hate cops. This is just going to make it worse." "It doesn't have to," Marcus countered gently. "Accountability isn't about tearing anyone down. It's about building trust. When someone makes a mistake, owning up to it shows strength, not weakness. That's how you start healing wounds instead of creating more." Before Grayson could respond, the door to the interrogation room swung open, revealing Detective Harris. His face was grim as he stepped inside, closing the door behind him. "Grayson," he said firmly, "we need to talk, now." Grayson hesitated, glancing between Harris and Marcus. Reluctantly, he rose from his seat and followed Harris into the hallway, leaving Marcus alone in the room. As the door clicked shut, Marcus let out a slow breath, allowing himself a moment of reflection. He knew this was far from over. In fact, the hardest battles were yet to come. But he also knew he wasn't fighting alone. Outside those walls, thousands of voices were rising in unison, demanding justice. Not just for him, but for everyone who had ever been wronged by systemic prejudice. Meanwhile, the chaos outside the station showed no signs of abating. News, fans lined the street, their satellite dishes pointed skyward like mechanical sentinels. Social media feeds buzzed with updates, hashtags like "Justice for Marcus" trending nationwide. People shared videos of the arrest, dissecting every detail and calling for transparency. The footage painted a damning picture: a decorated naval officer, unarmed and cooperative, being treated like a criminal simply because of the color of his skin. Civil rights organizations quickly mobilized, issuing statements condemning the incident and calling for immediate action. Local leaders joined the chorus, urging the police department to conduct a thorough investigation. Even politicians weighed in, recognizing the potential political fallout if the matter wasn't addressed swiftly and fairly. The pressure mounted, rapidly, forcing authorities to act. Back inside the station, senior officers convened in an emergency meeting. Chief Reynolds, the head of the department, presided over the gathering, his face etched with worry. "This is a disaster," he admitted bluntly, addressing the room. "We've got protests brewing, media scrutiny everywhere, and calls for accountability coming from all sides. We need to get ahead of this, fast." Detective Harris nodded, stepping forward. "Sir, based on the evidence we've seen so far, it's clear Officer Grayson acted improperly. Not only did he detain Admiral Thompson without probable cause, but his behavior throughout the encounter raises serious concerns about racial bias." Reynolds sighed heavily, rubbing his temples. "I understand that," he said, his tone weary. "But suspending Grayson, or worse, isn't going to magically fix everything. We'll still be dealing with the aftermath for months, maybe years. That's why we need to do it right," Harris insisted. "Start by releasing a statement acknowledging the mistake and pledging full cooperation with an independent investigation. Then suspend Grayson pending review. Transparency is key here. If we try to cover this up, it'll blow up in our faces." After a long pause, Reynolds nodded reluctantly. "All right," he said. "Draft the statement and notify Grayson immediately. This ends tonight." By morning, the story had exploded onto national headlines. Major news outlets picked up the narrative, amplifying the outrage already simmering online. Pundits debated the implications of the incident, while experts weighed in on the broader issue of racial profiling within law enforcement. Meanwhile, grassroots movements gained momentum, organizing rallies and vigils across the country. Protesters carried banners featuring Marcus's face alongside slogans like "Respect and protect our heroes" and "No justice, no peace." For Marcus, the attention was overwhelming but necessary. He understood that his position as a high-ranking naval officer gave him a unique platform, one he intended to use wisely. Early the next day, he released a brief statement through his lawyer, thanking supporters and reaffirming his commitment to justice. "This isn't about me," he emphasized. "It's about ensuring that no one else has to endure what I experienced last night. Change starts with accountability, and I believe we can emerge stronger from this." His words resonated deeply, inspiring countless individuals to speak out against discrimination in all its forms. Students organized walkouts, workers staged strikes, and community leaders hosted town halls to discuss solutions. The movement sparked by Marcus's ordeal became a catalyst for dialogue, pushing conversations about race, privilege, and reform to the forefront of public consciousness. As days turned into weeks, the impact continued to grow. The police department implemented sweeping reforms, including mandatory anti-bias training and increased oversight of officer conduct. Lawmakers introduced legislation aimed at improving accountability and reducing disparities in policing practices. And Marcus, despite the trauma of that fateful night, emerged as a symbol of hope, a reminder that even in the darkest moments, courage and resilience could pave the way for progress. But Marcus knew the journey was far from over. True change took time, effort, and unwavering dedication. And as he stood before crowds of supporters during a rally weeks later, he reminded them of one simple truth: justice isn't given, it's earned. Together, we must continue fighting for a future where everyone is treated with dignity and respect. Because until then, none of us are truly free.